Hey, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. First, thanks for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button or leaving a comment before you leave, that helps out a lot. Today I'm going to do a video that I've been putting off for a while. I've gotten multiple requests over the past couple of years for a basic tools video for beginners, and so that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to split it into four major sections. I'm going to do hand tools, power tools, consumables, and finally just kind of go over briefly some things that are nice to have if you can afford them. So before we get started, I wanted to thank my YouTube subscribers. We just passed 6,100, and that's amazing and wonderful. Thank you guys for all of your support. I also wanted to thank my patrons over on Patreon who are paying for my premium content. It's a really nice group of people. I love that they interact with each other and share information. It's a nice community over there. Not to mention that they're helping to pay my bills. So thanks, you guys. I really appreciate it. All right, let's get started. Okay, well, one of the things you do when you're silversmithing is you do a lot of cutting of metal. And there's two basic types of cutting you do. You're cutting things that are wire-like, and you're cutting things that are flat or sheet. So some examples of flat things that you cut with shears, like these, would be silver sheet, sheet solder, bezel. All those kinds of things are very flat, and they cut the most easily with these kinds of things. This is a wire cutter, or sometimes called a side cutter or dikes. These are exclusively for cutting wire sort of material, like half round, round, square, things that have some thickness to them but are not flat stock, really. So for cutting flat things, for most things I use these, and these are Fisker's craft shears that you can find most either on Amazon or at a local craft store. They're relatively inexpensive. I think they're up to about $15 now. But I have gotten to where I cut pretty thick sheet, silver sheet with this, and they hold up pretty well. It took me about 2 years to kill a pair of these, so I was pleased with them. For really thick stuff, up to about 18 gauge, I used to always use aviation tin snips, and these run you about 15 bucks too, probably. But almost everybody has one of these in their toolbox already. They cut pretty well through up to about 18 gauge. Beyond that, you're going to have to use a jeweler's saw. So, and these are available at a local hardware store or online. These particular ones that I like are Zuron side cutters, and they cut relatively flat on one side and leave a beveled cut on the other. And I find that they cut really well through softer metals like silver and copper and even brass. I do occasionally get lazy and try to cut something too thick and break one of the blades on these, but in general these are a very good tool. In my area these run around $15. So if you need to cut some thicker stuff or cut out a ornate shape in a piece of sheet, you'll need some kind of a jeweler's saw. I like this kind. For years I was using something like this, and I hated sawing. I just really did. It was hard to get this blade tight. I struggled with breaking blades and stuff all the time, mostly because of that, probably. So it wasn't a good experience, but once I got this one, I don't remember what these are called. They're like the Magic C or something like that. But you can find these for roughly 23 bucks, I think, or something is what I paid for this. So at the time of this filming, anyway. Bench pins are going to run you anywhere from 10 bucks to, up to 50 probably, depending upon how nice one you get. I think it's one of those things you could probably make yourself if you have the right tools. This is some scrap oak I had that was an old wine rack. I glued it a couple of pieces together and cut out what I needed, and with a C-clamp you can just clamp it to your table, and you got a nice bench pin like that. So, and that didn't cost me anything really, because I already had a C-clamp. So that's a nice way to go. Another item I think we should include in the cutting section of the video here is your files. And I use two basic files. The half round jeweler's file, which is just one of what usually comes in a set of 10 or 12 different kinds of files of different shapes. This is the one I generally need the most, so it's usually the one I grab, and you can probably get by just with this one as far as having the, out of the whole set, keeping it laying around. For your general filing, I use a single cut mill bastard file, and I like Nicholson ones. They seem to last for a little bit longer than some of the other ones, and I think they're about $8. If you get a file, though, you're probably going to want a handle too. This is a generic store-bought one that you can get. I think they're like $3 to $5 a piece, and they last for a long time. So when I got a lathe a while back, I started making file handles. So they'll be in my merch store if I ever get around to adding some inventory, because I don't have much time. So. But yeah, this is what they look like when you get them, so you'll need some sort of a handle to make it comfortable to hold. The price on a set of these is generally between like $8 and $20, so depending upon how good of ones you get. This particular one I have is a double cut, so it cuts in both directions, and that's kind of nice for these little ones. Okay, the next subsection of hand tools that I'm going to talk about are tools to shape metal without removing metal. And there's a whole bunch of different things you can get here, and there's only a few that you probably should get at the beginning. One I think I'd start with is it's nice to have a flat metal surface of some sort that you can pound things on, and this is just a little piece of thick steel. You can buy these at jewelry supply places at probably $20-ish, I think, for something like this. Another one that is kind of nice to have for just shaping things a little bit. You don't do a lot of forging at first generally, but having a hammer with a relatively smooth head, I polish this head on this little chasing hammer once in a while, is nice. And chasing hammers have kind of a little snap action that makes it nice for flattening things out. So yeah, and these are, you can get a cheap chasing hammer for $12 to $15 on Amazon, or you could pay for a nicer one. The one I got off of Amazon originally, this is the head from it, but the handle eventually wore out. It started splintering up here, so I made myself a new one, but it still works great. So, if you're shaping rings, you're going to need a ring mandrel. This is a cheap one. It's steel. I think I paid about $18, 25 or 30 years ago, and I believe they're up to, let's see, what are they now? So I saw them, similar ones, on Amazon for somewhere about that price, but if you get an expensive one, you'll probably have more accurate measurements on here, although that really doesn't matter that much, because generally you'll be finding someone's finger size with one of these, and this is made by a different company than this, and so they don't always line up quite right. This one's at about a 7 1/4, but it says 7 on it. So what you care about mostly on this is where it lands on the mandrel, if this is the one that fits their finger. So then you can measure for your ring around the mandrel. So these also, I'm imagining plastic ones like these anymore, maybe $5 for 2 or 3 pairs of them. If you're going to shape stuff around the ring mandrel, a lot of people use a rawhide hammer, and I didn't bother to look these up because it's been a long time since I used this. I prefer to use a plastic-headed hammer, and this has got a rubber side and a plastic side. The plastic side imparts more force when you make a hit, but it's soft enough to where it doesn't ding up the metal. So that's why you'd use a rawhide mallet too, is to shape it without putting dents in the metal. Plastic works well. It's got a more concentrated weight in the middle and a smaller head, so you can direct the force more efficiently. I like that much better. So I would recommend getting a plastic-headed hammer and a steel ring mandrel. Don't buy the most expensive one, probably. You could get a nice steel dapping block set, but I didn't use that very much until I was pretty far along. I did, however, occasionally use one of these wooden dapping blocks that come with a punch or two. And when you need to flare something just a little bit like that, these are kind of handy to have around. These cost, when I looked it up last night, $6 or $8. So they're handy to have around. Like I said, there's lots of different things. If you're planning on getting into forging and stuff, forging stakes are super expensive from what I remember, and I don't do much of that, so I don't really have any. But I remember looking at the price of them, and they were pretty pricey. So I would wait on those until you decide whether that aspect of silversmithing is what you're interested in. So, but these are just kind of general basic tools. So plastic hammer, not rawhide. I don't think that it's as easy to use these. So probably the most important tools for shaping stuff are your pairs of pliers that you use frequently when you're silversmithing. I have found that the chain nose pliers, which are basically needle nose pliers with a flat inside, no teeth on them, that's what you generally use for most general purpose things when you're using pliers. These round nose pliers, which have kind of a tapering cone on either side, that allows you to make little tiny loops in wires, which is kind of handy, of different sizes there. And then these are probably my favorite pliers. They're wide nose rather than these needle nose or chain nose kinds. Silver being kind of soft, it's nice to have something that spreads out the force a little bit when you're straightening things or bending things sharply, and this helps with that a little bit, so I use these a lot. These kind of pliers, each one of these would run anywhere between $5 to $20 a piece. Sometimes some of the jewelry places will have sets of these, and that's kind of nice too. I think that's why I first found out about these ones, was because I bought a set, because it was cheaper to buy a set than it was to buy these two in general. So if you have been a beader in the past, you probably have some of these things that you got at a craft store. I have found that a lot of the craft store brands are pretty cheaply made, and the way you can tell is the ends of the pliers start to become less stiff and aligned with each other. So if you grab something, they'll twist out a line. So you want something when you're grabbing things that the jaws aren't going to move at all. So if I want this to bend, I don't want the jaws to separate in different directions. So there's a lot of different ways to solder things, and if you're not planning on soldering the way that I solder, if you've watched any of my other videos, some of this may not be relevant to you. As I spray on my flux, and I don't paint it on like a lot of people do, so I use a spray bottle, which you can get for $2 or $3 at the grocery store or at Walgreens or something like that. So that's a real cheap way to apply your flux. Some people have suggested for little stuff that I use an eyedropper, and I haven't located an eyedropper yet. I know I have one laying around the house somewhere. I just have to find it. But that would be a good idea too for applying liquid flux. Your soldering surfaces that you use, I debated about putting these into the consumable section or into the soldering section, because they do wear out over time and you need to replace them. So the primary soldering surface that I use is called a solderite block, and these come in 12 by 12 sheets. This is the ½ inch thick version, and they're a good heat resistant material to use for general purpose soldering. A lot of people struggle with using these because they were started by using charcoal blocks, which are the more common thing that people use. But I kind of like these. They're cheaper, and when they wear out, they're easy to replace. Like I said, I buy them 12 by 12 sheet and cut them into fourths. That way you have 8 surfaces, and so it lasts for quite a while. You know, they start to get fluxed a little bit after a while, and then eventually they'll start to break apart, and you'll have to replace them. But something I keep around for situations where I need a softer surface are these magnesia blocks. And you see they're thicker and they're real crumbly. However, they do have some good functions for me, because every once in a while you want something sticking straight up and it's not going to be attached yet, so you want something you can push something into. And having a softer surface like that is kind of nice sometimes. So I think these are like $9 to $12 last time I looked, or something like that. And these break down pretty quickly because I tend to be pushing stuff into them, and it crumbles them up a little bit. But they are handy. So most people use a charcoal block for their primary soldering surface, and that's a good idea. They do break down over time if you're spraying flux on them, and they're a little more expensive than this. There's several different kinds. You can get just the traditional ones. If you do that, you're going to want to wrap them with wire because they will start to crack almost immediately when you start applying heat, and that'll hold them together. These compressed ones that I've been buying in recent years seem to not need that, and they last a really long time. They're a little bit more dense. So they work pretty well. And when they start to get too messed up on the surface, you can find a piece of concrete and rub them on there, and that flattens the surface out nice again. So don't do it to your neighbor's driveway. Okay. A couple of other things you need for soldering, or I use for soldering, and did as a beginner as well. T-pins. These things, my mom used to call them macrame pins because she did macrame. They're good for poking into stuff or separating things or elevating things. They don't generally stick. They're made out of steel of some sort, and so you don't have to worry about them sticking to your silver too much. Some insulated cross-lock tweezers are handy in order to place little bits of solder in places, or to grab things and move them around, or to nudge things back into position. Insulated so you can use them in the when you have a flame on the piece at the same time. These are $3 to $5, I think. This is a tungsten soldering pick. I find that this is one of the most useful tools that I have. It's great. Tungsten will stay strong even at high temperatures, so you can pick up bits of solder with it. You can nudge things back into position. And as you get more advanced in this, you'll find that you use it more and more for soldering if you go the route that I did. So very handy. Those are $5. The only thing about these ones, after a while they start to, the heat from this getting so hot starts to cook the wooden stick a little bit, and they'll eventually fall out. So you got to replace these now and again too. I almost forgot the copper tongs too. One of the things that you do after you've been soldering stuff is you put your piece in the pickle safe, and pickle safe is generally some sort of acid, and so you never stick iron or steel tools in the acid because it does some funny things. Copper tongs don't have that same effect, and so these are used for fishing stuff in and out of the pickle safe, and sometimes dunking it into the water after that, so to clean it off. So these are about $5 to $6, I think. One final soldering tool is called a third hand, and every once in a while you have a situation where you either want to hang something in the air, like a ring, or if you need to grab something to hold it in place, and this is one of those tools you can do that with. I try not to use them as much as possible because they soak up a lot of heat when you're trying to solder things. However, there are times where it comes in pretty useful. So it's basically just a tweezers on a platform, and it has an adjustable kind of joint there so you can turn it every which way. There's some designs where it won't allow you to turn it all the way sideways, so I would try to stick with this kind of a base if you can. I get the best luck with this sort of thing. And they're $15-ish. They also make some, you see them selling, and they have the little alligator clips on them. I don't care too much for those. I didn't ever see much of a purpose. I don't think they would survive very long under the heat, I would think, the mechanisms, but I'm not sure. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Okay, the last thing in the soldering tools section is what should a beginner get for a torch? And there's a lot of options out there, but if you want to get in on the cheap, these benzomatic propane torches work just fine. They produce enough heat to solder pretty well up to a certain size of piece. You start getting into the cuff bracelet size pieces, and it gets a little hard to get up to the soldering temperature you need it to with these. However, you can use one in each hand if you are multi-talented. But if you want to start doing big pieces, you'll eventually get to a more powerful, hotter torch. But for starters, this is a great way to go. The downside of it is it's probably meant to be used right side up. It's a plumber's torch. So sometimes as the torches age, when you're using them upside down, the flame size will fluctuate a lot. But what you're really looking for in the tip on these guys, and there's a lot of different tips out there, you want one that produces a little narrow, short, dark blue flame with a little kind of corona of yellow flame around it. But you can barely see the yellow flame, just the sharp blue flame is what you're looking for. The ones that produce a really diffuse flame are not so good for what we're doing here. So And generally the ones that have auto strikers on them, I have found that those don't have the right kind of tips generally. And it's possible that I haven't seen every possible one out there, but uh, I know these benzomatics with the short and even the longer tips that aren't self-starting work great. So another option for beginners are those little butane torches that are refillable. Um, I had one of those for a while, and it pretty quickly developed a leak, so it wouldn't stay full for very long. They produce a decent amount of heat for small pieces, and they work okay, but I imagine you're going to have trouble when you start getting up to bigger pieces, getting enough heat. And like I said, I think a lot of them are made kind of cheaply, those ones, because they're pretty cheap to buy, and so they may not end up lasting very long for you. These ones, the replacement tanks for these, I think it's about 20 bucks now, and you get one tank with them. And you know, the replacement tanks are 3 or 4 bucks, so, and they last for quite a while. So, and they work great for beginners. Okay, another subcategory of hand tools, I suppose, would be measurement stuff. And if you're just starting out, you don't need anything too sophisticated. I find just a generic foot-long ruler that has centimeters and millimeters on the other side works pretty well. Most times I'm not measuring really precise stuff. I'm just trying to get either the center of something, or if I'm doing something a little more sophisticated, I'll sometimes use a little more advanced way of measuring, but this works pretty well. I'm not sure where I got this little metal one, but I use this one all the time because it's got a nice 90-degree angle, which helps me to scribe out, you know, nice corners and things like that. And it's got inches on one side, millimeters on centimeters on the other. So I use both of those pretty frequently. So you probably have something around the house you can use for that, as well as a Sharpie, which I use to mark silver a lot. Okay, there's two primary tools that a beginner needs as far as power tools go. And one of them is a hand tool that's a rotary hand tool. And I have a Dremel, and I think it's great for a beginner. There are more expensive rotary tools out there that are kind of the gold standard for people who make jewelry, and generally beginners don't want to invest that kind of money because they're in the 250 plus range. So Dremels generally you can get for anywhere from $60 to $100. If you do get a Dremel, make sure to get one that has a cord, because the rechargeable ones tend not to have very much torque to them, and they will run out of juice pretty quickly. So I use this very frequently when I'm cleaning things up, and so it's an important tool. I think I've worn out 4 of them now over the past 30 years doing jewelry stuff. So they last a long time, and you get your money's worth out of them. So the other tool is a polishing machine. And polishing machines are one of the things that inhibit people from getting started on this because they're expensive. I will show you what mine looks like, and mine's probably a $600 or $700 machine that I found used. Somebody else was getting rid of their tools, so I didn't have to pay that much. So if you can find one of those at a garage sale or something, that's always a better deal. But expect for that one to fork out for a decent one somewhere in the range of 550 plus. So the requirement for your polishing wheel, in my opinion, is it needs to be at least a half a horsepower. Other than that, it doesn't matter what brand you get. I've had several brands over the years. But when I first started, what I did was I converted a bench grinder, a half horsepower bench grinder. I took off all of the stuff that encased the wheels and put tapered spindles on the ends of that, and it worked great. The only thing it didn't have was the fan in the back of a polishing machine to suck up the dust, so it was a little bit extra dusty. But it worked great for a number of years for me. Anything less than a half a horsepower, your polisher will not remove fire scale. It just doesn't do a very good job of that. It doesn't have the horsepower for it. So a lot of people ask me, can I just get by with a hand tool and no polisher? I would say no, unless you have a Fordham, because they don't have the horsepower to do it. They bog down and they can't really remove fire stain or fire scale. So you need something with a half horsepower for polishing. Okay, so this is my polishing machine. You can see I have an N95 vented mask over here. That's because the polishing compounds we use are bad for your lungs, so you want to make sure to wear a mask when you're doing it, but this is my polishing machine. So there's some different chemicals and some different things like drill bits and bits for the Dremel that you run out of over time and you have to replace periodically. So that's what this section's about. It's about consumables. And so some of the basic ones you need for silversmithing are pickle safe, which is a way to clean up your pieces right before you polish them and stuff. I get Rio pickle. I think this is like $12 now for a 3-pound thing. I think the packaging's different now, but it's a sulfuric acid pickle, and I like it. It works pretty well, and it's pretty. I mix it up pretty dilute. There's a lot of different kinds of pickle you can use, and you can experiment with different kinds that are a little less chemically. Like they make some pickles out of citric acid and things like that. So you might look into that, do a little research. There's some other ways to do it without such toxic chemicals. The other chemically thing that I use is called Mighty Flux, and it's a flux that's liquid. It's made out of boric acid and I think alcohol, and I buy it by the gallon. I don't remember how much the gallon is, but by the pint, it's I think it's $11 a pint or so. I usually get it from Rio, as you can tell. There's another type called Patron's self-pickling flux that's very similar. I used to use that. Polishing compounds. I use white diamond for my aggressive polishing compound on the first polishing wheel, and then I use a polishing compound called ZAM, and they're both $6 or $7. $7.30. I usually get a bigger bar than this. I don't know where I got this cute little one, but yeah, the $6 or $7 one's usually 9 inches long by 2 inches by 2 inches, I think. So they last for quite a while. Some other consumables. The most frequent Dremel bits that I use, they make these. They generally have a little mandrel with a screw in the end that you can screw down things for your Dremel. When you get it, it comes with a bunch of bits. And these will fit right on there, screw in there, and this is a silicone abrasive white wheel. And so if you touch the edge like this, it's very sandpapery feeling. It's an abrasive grit built into this. These ones I like because they come to a nice sharp edge, and it's good for getting in between wires and stuff like that when they're brand new. They eventually wear down, and when they're flatter, they're good for the insides of rings and stuff. But they're a very aggressive silver removal technique. So they're good for a lot of stuff. You got to be a little careful using them because they cut pretty aggressively. So for polishing on the Dremel, which, like I said, isn't a very effective thing, but on the insides of the bands and stuff, I use after I've gotten rid of all the tool marks, I use felt wheels. This is a little hard felt wheel that would also fit on the same kind of mandrel that has a screw going down into the end. And use this with some polishing compound, probably ZAM because it's more aggressive, and that's the other primary wheel that I use on the Dremel. Some ones that I've come to use in more recent times. I've been using these for years, and these are both available at Rio Grande. Although Rio Grande is not a sponsor, so Rio Grande, I would like to have you as a sponsor. So normally I was using my portable drill to drill holes, and I was running through tiny drill bits pretty quickly. Found these on Amazon. These are little small drill bits, and they go smallest to largest. And I've been able to break one already, but they seem to hold up pretty well. And they were for 5 boxes like this. It was, I think, no more than $20, I don't think. So that's probably worth it. The other one are these burrs. These fit into your Dremel. If you see, they come in all different shapes. This was $14, and they're diamond burrs. So they're really good if you need to remove material pretty aggressively from a small spot on your piece. And I find these super useful. I've used them a lot since I got them. And they're so cheap. I couldn't believe they were only like 13 or 14 bucks. So here's another set of felt wheels. These ones come in different shapes and sizes. And I got these off of Amazon as well, and I think they were about 15 bucks, maybe less even. But they're kind of cheap, and they wear out pretty quickly. But you get a whole bunch to start with, and they get one size smaller than this, but I used up all the really small ones pretty quickly. But they're felt wheels, and use that with a white diamond polishing compound, and they work out pretty well. So, and for 14 bucks, I can replace them periodically. So, if you're using your jeweler's saw, you're going to run through some blades. They break pretty easily, so you can buy these sets of various sizes. I think they give you a dozen of each or something like that, or maybe 20 of each. I got these ones off Amazon. They weren't very expensive, if I recall. So, but it's nice to get a variety because sometimes you need some bigger teeth and sometimes you need some smaller ones. So, finally, in consumables, I have found in recent years that my ability to produce a really unique, fun piece of jewelry has gotten much better, and primarily because I started sketching things out. And that gave me a little better plan of action when I started. And so you can see this book here is almost full now, and this is the one I started when I was started doing the YouTube channel. I'm up to towards the end here, so pretty soon I'm going to be running out. This is my outline for this, so I'll have to break out a new one. And these are available on my merch store if you care to support the channel. 3 different styles now. I'm not sure which one of these I'm going to use for the next one. Probably this one because it's got pretty colors on it. But Edie had fun, my wife Edie had fun making different filters on my head. Yeah, these are for sale in my merch store, so I'd love it if you choose me to be your sketchbook person. I believe they're $21.95 on the merch store. Well, I think I've covered most of the primary tools that you need to start as a beginner. I thought for the last section I'd show a few things that are kind of nice to have, but you don't really need them at the beginning. But you might, as you continue on your path, you might want to look into these. I'll probably do another video at some point talking more about these, but here's just a quick glance at some things that I use quite a bit that I didn't need at first, but I kind of need now. So I'm going to start with this one. This is called a disc cutter, and it allows you to cut perfect circles. A steel dapping set comes with a dapping block with different size divots in it, and then different size ones of these to shape things. For measuring things, I use these calipers relatively frequently if I need to keep things in proportion. Having some kind of calipers like this to measure precise things is kind of nice. Out of all of these things, if you're going to get something, unnecessary but kind of super handy, this is called a miter vise jig. I just learned about this in the past couple of years. I didn't realize these existed, but it has both a 45-degree angle and a straight 90-degree angle. If you stick a piece of wire or sheet in there, you can file a nice perfect flat edge or a perfect 45-degree angle. They also make nicer ones that have 60s and 30s as well. So a jeweler's loop comes in handy pretty frequently. Having a draw plate is kind of handy because you can pull wire down to a smaller size. If you have a draw plate, you need some draw tongs to hold onto the wire with. Bail making pliers. These are both different variations of bail making pliers. And these are great for making real symmetrical loops on things, or rounding tubing back out after you've soldered it together and stuff like that. So a lot of really useful things to do with these. So that would be up on my list of things after you get the basics to start adding to my tools. It's kind of handy now and again to have a soft inside on some pliers that you have. These ones are nylon. I used to have some stuff that was rubber, kind of a liquid rubber you dunk your pliers in to put a coating on them. It'd take 2 or 3 coatings, and then it would have a pretty soft surface so you didn't ding up your metal so much. So those are handy sometimes. Different kinds of mandrels. There is an occasion pretty frequently where I have a ring that has kind of a flat underside on the top of the ring here, and so having a flat-sided mandrel that has one side that's kind of flatter than the rest is handy for shaping the rest of those back into a circle if you need to. I also have a rounded square mandrel, which I've had for years, People are really intrigued by square rings, so sometimes I'll make a sale if you make them a square ring. So that's kind of nice to have. If you're going to be melting your scrap, it's nice to have a crucible on a stick like this, and you can melt stuff down in it. If you want to do freeform castings, that's kind of nice to have. Or if you're going to recycle your materials, and you also have a mold like this, you can cast yourself some ingots or some of these rods and roll it through the rolling mill if you have one of those. I discovered this year. This is kind of cool. It's polar graph paper. I did not know it existed, but there's an occasion where I'm making something and I need to have perfect angles, you know, like a prong setting or something, and sometimes having something like this helps you to get everything lined up right. So I use these, I bought these for lapidary purposes years ago for tracing out stone shapes, and the round and the oval one I use all the time when I'm sketching out designs. This one has some egg shapes, ovals, and some rectangles here, so I find those to be more useful than I would have expected. This thing is a ring vise, and it's basically pressure activated. These are kind of nice, especially if you don't have very strong hands. You can pinch a ring in there and then hold it better when you're setting the stone. So, one tool that's kind of nice to have too that I almost left off here is a rolling mill. Those are just a few things I might add to my collection as you start to fill out your tools. And there's certainly lots of fun tools you can buy. I know I'd love to have more tools, but alright, well I hope that you found those things useful, and like I said, in the future I'll do a little more complete one about some of these other tools, and probably we'll do one about the various gauges of silver that I buy generally for raw materials, and about recycling it and stuff like that. Okay, well I hope you found that informative, especially if you're a beginner. If you did enjoy this, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. That helps out. And I'd love to hear what you think. Leave me a comment, suggestions, those kinds of things are great. But check out some of my other videos, think about it, and then subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. So don't forget to check out the video description down below for some relevant links to the channel. There's links to my website, my merch store. You can buy me a coffee, which is kind of a way to tip me. And there's a link to my Patreon. So check those out. Thanks for coming. Happy silversmithing. Take care.